How's everybody this evening? Everybody here okay? Right. Thank y'all for coming out on a stormy evening. We have a couple of speakers tonight. We have a little bit of business to attend to first. First thing I want to do is thank Mr. Ladd and the Carnival Museum for their hospitality in allowing us to meet here. However, with that, I have to let you know that the next meeting will not be held here. Okay. Mr. Ladd is going on vacation. We look forward to seeing his photographs when he gets back, but we will be sending out information about the date and the location, which will be downtown, sometime right after this meeting. So you can catch it on Facebook or you can get it by email. If you have not signed the roster over there, please sign it before you leave. If you've already told us that you're on Facebook or not, that you don't have to put that on there. But if you are new to the meetings, if you would put that you're on Facebook, we can then point you in the right direction and give you a lot more information. One of the things I wanted to talk about tonight for the new business is the board has been meeting to try to formulate some committees. So if you're interested in committees, participating in committees with this society, if you'll see me afterwards or email me or send me a Facebook message about what you would like to be involved in, and then we'll put together some committees. We have some ideas going forward. I think you're going to like these ideas. But we're still in the planning stage, so we want to go ahead and try to get enough people involved so that we can move forward. As far as people doing research, I want to kind of get an idea tonight. If you're doing research, or actively or thinking about doing research, if you would, raise your hand. Okay. I'm trying to get an idea. How many people are here for the reason of research, and who are here who wants to participate in listening in on the history of Mardi Gras? We just want to try to have the speakers that fit for the crowd that we have here. So it looks like, you know, almost not quite half, but we figure about half would be interested. And if you are interested in, see one of these people raise their hands, or one of us up here would be glad to work with you, talk with you, tell you how to go about it. As I've said before, there are a million different topics that you can research, and you'll be amazed when you start to do research, all the stuff you start to find, and you'll start to learn a lot more about Mobile, not only Mobile Carnival history, but Mobile history as a whole. So with that, we're going to go ahead and move forward. One of the things I've tried to do is start these meetings on time, keep it very concise so that we can have our speakers speak. Tonight we have three speakers. The first two speakers spoke at our first meeting, but tonight we have the privilege of having Ann Pond come back to speak with us, and I'm going to ask for Ann to come up now.
Hi, thanks for coming. I think it's awesome, first of all, that everybody's here. I missed the last meeting, but I think it's wonderful that we have so many people participating, because I know I enjoyed this and I'm glad other people do, so keep spreading word. And I also have to say I love the Facebook page, and thank you of course for organizing this, but that Facebook page is really wonderful. If you haven't checked it out, nice things on there, research every once in a while, it's wonderful. So everything's going well with this, and I'm just here to talk about my research, because I said this last time I was here a couple of weeks ago, a couple of meetings ago I should say, that I've just been working on this literally for 20 years, but only within the last year have I finally gotten to the point where I can devote 100% of my time to it and finally publish this, what I wanted to be a book on basically the antebellum period, and then it became more and more of the 19th century, and so it became where I said, you know, this is really 3 books. It just has to be a 3-part series. So that's what it became in the last year. It is a 3-part series, and it's finally gotten together, and it's a big learning process, just that in itself, just the editing process. But I wanted to just kind of share with you what the books are about, and just maybe a couple of highlights. I've got some. I actually, again, I'm kind of new at this. I need to have like a whole bunch on hand I'm learning, because on Tuesday night we had a little thing in our neighborhood, and I actually got rid of all of the first. I wanted to have the first 2 of the series here for you. I got rid of all the first, so I have some of the second, but let me show you this. Let me grab this picture so that you can see. Okay, so this is the first book. That's what it looks like. That's the first of the series. So the first book in this 3-part series is mainly about the Kraft family, Michael Kraft's family, who Michael Kraft started the Cowbellians, and so that's what the first one looks like. The second one, oh, I should have grabbed these. Okay, so the second one is basically, it focuses a lot on the Masons, so that's what it looks like. And then the third one, I'm always most excited about the one I'm really just finished or working on, and so that's the one on Joe Kane. And but the thing is, even though the 3 have like kind of a main theme, they go chronologically. So with the Cowbellian book, it's really mostly about the 1820s and 1830s. And then this Mason's book is really about the 30s, 40s, and 50s. And then Joe Kane is really mostly about the 50s, 60s, and a little bit of the 70s, 1870s. So that's about as far as it goes. But in the big picture, what the goal of this series is to try to portray Mardi Gras as a part of our American history, which it, you know, really is. That's the way it should be perceived. We tend to always look at Mardi Gras as this European thing that we kind of copied and we do. But when you really start to look at it, it's obviously, to me, I like to say it's more American than apple pie. It really is. It's the best example of American culture that you can possibly imagine, because if we go back to the Cowbellians, the first secretive fraternity that was a parading association, their ideas, their influences came just as much from the Northeast and all of the courts in the Northeast as they did from the Masons and as they did from the region in which these parades began in the Gulf Coast. So it's all these different influences coming together. That's what really made this first Cowbellian group what it was. And so that's the focus of the first book. But what I really wanted, also really important to me, was to make this something that everybody could read, that everybody would enjoy, and not think of it as, oh, I don't want to read history. So I tried as hard as I could to make it not so much like history, but just through the perspective of the people. And so I really kind of think the first and third books do that the best. The Kraft book, I was trying to show Michael Kraft himself, but it starts with his brother, sister, and his very interesting brother-in-law, his sister's husband, and his family. And then it goes into his brother, his older brother, who lived in New Orleans for a while, and then came over to Mobile for a while, and eventually went back to Memphis. But then it comes back, of course, to Michael Kraft and the origin of this Cowbellian group. And so I try to portray it through the people. But it's the most interesting thing. So some of you I know are involved in research, as you just said, but if you're just kind of thinking, maybe you look things up every once in a while, you're just kind of interested, there's so much more, that we don't know. And it's always it's just a great experience. Every single day I get this light bulb. Like, oh, that's why, that's where this person was. And so there's a lot of fun stuff. And I think I tried to put as much of the fun stuff as I could in the books. So with Michael Kraft, for instance, I was at, the beginning of last year, I was just thrilled just to realize that, yeah, he really did have an older brother. And then as I learned all about his life, it's all really connected. All of these cotton brokers are going back and forth between New Orleans and Mobile, and they share what's happening in New Orleans. Everybody in Mobile knew that New Orleans had their balls and their celebrations Mobile, they were more happy to have these parades and these, very elaborate parades. They were very proud of this. This was their New Year's Eve thing, and so it didn't come together, of course, the kind of parades that were created in Mobile didn't come together with the celebration of Mardi Gras Day in New Orleans until slowly in the 1830s. It was coming along, 1840s, but when it really all came together was with Comus, because even in the 1830s and 1840s, when in New Orleans on Mardi Gras Day, they were having parades very much organized like the Cowbellians, they still didn't have a fraternity. They still didn't have a Cowbellian group that was going to have their initiation rituals, that was going to have their secretive practices and their meetings throughout the year. They still didn't have that until they had Comus in 1857. So that's really when it all came together. So that, of course, goes back to the fact that we never want to say anybody's first in anything, really. And so there's really no first, Mobile or New Orleans. It's always a back and forth. It's all coming together. And so that's, the gist of the first one. The second one, I just really wanted to show more of how the Masons, this has been another big thing for me. I always knew about the Masons a little bit and symbols and how we look at Mardi Gras organizations with their symbols and their themes, and we think of classical and ancient history, and I knew that the Masons kind of thought the same way. But it really did come down to where the Cowbellians, their ceremonies were copied exactly from what the Masons were doing. Their symbols are exactly what they were doing. And so it's really just that. It's really just based on Masonic examples. And then I started to really discover how many of these secret societies, these secret fraternities really existed before the war. And then, of course, we're more familiar with some of those that had, a racist agenda after the war. But there were so many secret, male-only groups. They didn't parade, but they had these same ceremonies, these same practices. They had different agendas. But that's been really interesting to really see the real depth of the influence of the Masons on everybody in society. So that's kind of my thrill for the second one. And then, of course, the third one, real quick, is about Cain. I had to show you this one picture, and it didn't come out really well. But, okay, so I tried to get back with the family and everything. And so it starts with his father. And it starts with his father and his mother in Morrisville, Pennsylvania. And so I got this picture of his mother. Isn't she striking? It's so, I don't know if you can see it. It's really funny. Oh, that's around there. But she does not look happy. It's just really funny. You kind of think of these people as, happy and go lucky and whatever. But anyway, so that's what it does. It starts with his father. And I have to tell you, the first chapter, last time I was here, I said I was going to talk about Julian Rayford and Francois Dior, but the first chapter is really all about them. And it's the idea of, it starts with the creation of this image. Why do we think Joe Cain is so amazing? Where did this idea come from? And, interestingly, I got into this book, particularly even in the last year, thinking to myself, really, it was totally just created by these two, it really wasn't that much. I mean, I've actually learned that, he was a little bit more of something than I thought he was, and a lot of people, even before his death, were looking at him as the king of Mardi Gras. They refer to him as that way in the newspaper. So, and so he's got a lot more depth than I expected at first, and so that's been a real interesting discovery. And there are, let me just tell you, his family was as, let's just say, wild and crazy as he was. And so there are a lot of eccentric people in his family, which have been really fun to write about. So, so that's my whole deal. And I would love to, I know I probably talked too long, but I would love to answer any questions at all. And so we'll probably, maybe do 2 seconds of that, but I'll definitely be around after because it's really fun to answer.
Tell them how to get your books.
Oh, thank you. Okay, so this is the thing. So I've got a few, and I've got some ordered things where, since I don't have everything, you can order one and I'll sign it and send it to you. But for now, they're on Kindle, and they're just on my website, which I'll make sure and give you before you leave if you want to stop by and get it. If you don't get one now, you can get it on the website. But they are now printed for the first time. So they weren't printed last time I was here. So now you don't have to download them. You can go on there and order them. I did have a setback with the printing of this one. I had to get it redone. So that's taken another week. But any day now, that one should be ready. So, so those, you can get them in print. But last thing, and again, this has all been a process of discovery for me. I just got it where they will be within probably 2 to 3 weeks. They'll be on all those like Barnes & Noble and Google and iBooks and all those other websites, and available in print too. So you should be able to find just about anywhere. And so then when we get closer to Mardi Gras, I'll try to get them in as many local stores and whatnot as possible. So, but anyway, I got them over there, and if you want to get one or all of them, then just come talk to me before we go. Thanks.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, you do want to see some kind of result from your research, and when you start to have books and that sort of thing, you can share with others. Then from there it builds and grows from that. So if you have any questions or any comments for Ann, what we'll do is we'll have the other two speakers, and as always, then we'll open up the floor. The next speaker is Steve Joyner.
Good to see you here. I'm the editor and publisher of Mobile Mask. Every year, one of the things I do for the Mask, I do a history story. This year, it's last year I did Joe Kane. Who's not going to do a Joe Kane story if you're doing Mardi Gras history? This year, it's somebody you probably didn't know anything about, probably never heard of. And I'm going to give you all a sneak listen to the story. There's some editing still to do and whatnot, but I think I pretty much got it together. First of all, I'd like to ask any members of the Dumont family to stand up for a quick second. Stand up. Yes, you did. You'll understand soon why I had the Dumont family stand up. They put me onto this story and helped me quite a bit. So here we go. And if you're not completely bored, I have a quick little sidebar to this story that I think is really interesting too. And Leslie hasn't read that one, so I know she wants to. During the first decades of organized Mardi Gras, there was a fair amount of intermingling between Mobile and New Orleans. Take, for example, Mobile's first ever Empress of Mardi Gras, Ethel Hodgson, it's hard to say, coronated in 1892. Decades later, Ethel's second husband, a New Orleans businessman raised in Mobile, was crowned Rex, the king of New Orleans Mardi Gras. The following year, Ethel herself was queen of an upper crust, non-parading crew in New Orleans. You've probably heard of it. Tracking Ethel's path, especially her role as Empress, is difficult because so much about Mardi Gras in those early years wasn't written down. Later, as authors attempted to reconstruct those events, dates and other details became muddled. The first monarch of Mobile Mardi Gras was known as Emperor Felix, and he ruled over his capital city for more than 20 years. After that, Felix II and III were referred to as king, and their consorts were queens. Felix was the invention of a group of Mobile businessmen eager to beef up the Mardi Gras celebration. The name Felix or the presence of any monarch did not appear in the Mobile newspapers until 1875. That contradicts all of the books which state Felix first appeared in 1872. I have not, to tell you the truth, been able to find any actual evidence that there was a Felix in 1872. In fact, in 1873 or 4, the one newspaper writer said, gosh, you know what we really need is a king. So, 1875, he was definitely there. Between 1875 and 1885, his visits were not every year, and his itinerary was ever changing as organizers struggled to find the right place for him. Then he disappeared for 6 straight years. Returning from that absence in 1892, Felix did not parade on Mardi Gras Day as he had through the first 10 years. Instead, he arrived on the Monday before Fat Tuesday and led a procession that included an extensive imperial staff, as well as police, fire, military, even bicyclists. What then would Felix do on Mardi Gras Day if he did not parade? Coronating an empress was apparently the answer dreamed up by organizers. The well-known books about Mobile and Mardi Gras, starting with Irwin Craighead in 1930, said Ethel's coronation in 1893 or 1894. However, on Ash Wednesday, March 2nd, 1892, the Daily Register said, Emperor Felix chose the Empress of the Carnival the night before, and she was Miss Ethel Hodgson, a debutante of the present season. Just 17 at the time, Ethel was Empress for only a few hours. She was coronated in Temperance Hall. Her coronation served as an opening act for the 25th annual ball of the Order of Myths. So if you can imagine, they're doing this little coronation, and the Order of Myths are all packed in there ready to get their ball started. At midnight, her reign was over. Who was Ethel's Felix? Unfortunately, the newspapers did not reveal the identity of those portraying Emperor Felix in those days. Craighead and all subsequent authors wrote that Ethel's Felix was St. Prince, or Major Sidney Trotter Prince, who was a politically active 44-year-old lawyer, recently widowed with 5 children. There is, however, no independent confirmation of Sidney's role as Felix. There are no known photographs of him as emperor, and his descendants said they were unaware of his reported stint as a royal. Other writings about Sidney, including his obituary, made no mention of Felix. But there are a couple of dots that connect Sidney to this particular masquerade. The first dot can be found in the Civil War. When the war started, Sidney was a student at the University of Alabama and a member of the Cadet Corps. He dropped out of school and helped form a military unit of former cadets. Sidney led the group, even though he was only a second lieutenant at the time, and the unit eventually joined the 7th Cavalry under General Nathan Bedford Forrest. The commander of the 7th Cavalry was Colonel Joseph Hodgson, whose daughter, Ethel Hodgson, was born several years after the war. Colonel Hodgson was a fearless warrior as well as a sober man of letters. According to the book, They Rode with Forrest by Michael Bradley, Colonel Hodgson held commissions with a couple of Alabama regiments before resigning and becoming a privateer, a term that's often synonymous with pirate. He was captured and held for a year as a prisoner of war. He was released, returned to Alabama, and formed the 7th Cavalry in 1863. This guy was nuts. According to Bradley, quote, the cavalry fight at Brentwood was one of the most vicious engagements of the entire war. The 7th Alabama and its supporting regiments knew that the escape of the Army of Tennessee depended on their holding their position. They were attacked by superior numbers carrying repeating rifles. Much of the fighting was in the dark and hand to hand. The 7th held its position so stubbornly that the U.S. Cavalry Commander, General James Wilson, called a halt for the night. This is the outfit that Joseph Hodgson and Sidney Trotter Prince were commanding. After the war, Colonel Hodgson took up journalism and became editor of the Montgomery Mail. It was there, according to his obituary, that he coined the term carpetbagger. I find nothing to actually back that up, but it's the first time I've ever seen anybody claim that they created that word. He also wrote a well-received book, The Cradle of the Confederacy, published in 1876. In 1877, Colonel Hodgson left Montgomery with his wife and 2 children to become the editor of the Daily Register in Mobile. He still held that position 15 years later when his daughter Ethel became Mobile's first Empress of Mardi Gras. So who could a father trust more to be the mock consort for his little girl than an officer who served under him in the war? Was Sidney chosen to be Felix because Ethel was to be the Empress, or the other way around? That question may never be answered. Colonel Hodgson, while a well-known and respected man in Mobile, had no overt connections to the Mardi Gras power structure. However, when he became editor of the Daily Register, Thomas Cooper de Leon, a fellow author of the post-Civil War South, became managing editor. De Leon was practically at the center of Mobile's Mardi Gras structure in the late 19th century, and the owner of the Register, John L. Rapier, was one of Mobile's first 10 Felixes, according to Craighead. Which brings us to the other dot. While the newspapers did not name the men posing as Felix in those days, they did name all of the women of the court. When Ethel was queen, that first year when she was empress, when Ethel was empress, Amy Triplet was her first maid of honor. The next year, 1893, Amy's sister, Hallie Triplet, was the empress, and her first maid of honor was Annie Prince, eldest child of Sidney Trotter Prince. Sidney then had ties to the Hodgson family and to the upper echelons of Mardi Gras. Even if it can't be proved that he was Ethel's Felix, it seems quite probable. On April 15th, 1907, 15 years after Ethel's big night in Temperance Hall, she was married at the age of 32 to Julian Albertus Waters, who was 52. 7.5 months later, Ethel gave birth to her only child, Julian Albertus Waters, Jr. Ethel's husband was in the cotton business, and he amassed a substantial estate. When he died at the age of 59, his holdings were in the range of $1 million. According to court records, Ethel made no claim to her husband's fortune. 5 years after becoming a widow, Ethel, at age 44, married a Mobilian who had moved to New Orleans, Edgar Rollins Dumont, age 50. The Dumonts. Edgar Dumont's descendants said he and Ethel may have known each other as kids, possibly from summer days spent on the eastern shore of Mobile Bay, since the Hodgson and Dumont families both had waterfront property in Point Clear. Edgar Dumont was born in Brazil, while his father worked there largely as a cotton broker. A year later, Dumont family returned to Mobile. As a young man, Edgar went into the lumber business, which took him to Mississippi. A skilled rifleman, he raised a company of volunteers in Scranton, Mississippi at the outbreak of the Spanish-American War and was commissioned as a captain. In 1901, Edgar married Yvonne Leon Garner in Moss Point, Mississippi. This all turned out very not well. I'm going to push forward a little bit. The Dumont, they moved to New York. He was trying to get his malaria treated that he came down with in the war. Then he moved to New Orleans. And he to work for Standard Export Lumber Company. But his wife either stayed in New York or spent a lot of time there for several years after. Her affair with a portrait artist became newspaper fodder in New York after the artist was arrested for assaulting a woman posing as his wife. That woman, Mrs. Dumont, later refused to testify against the artist. Edgar filed for divorce in 1911. All of the public attention on that affair must have been terribly embarrassing for Edgar, who was, by all accounts, a true Southern gentleman. So the day after Christmas, 1918, Edgar and Ethel were married in Mobile, First Baptist Church on Government Street. And then their two kids, they each had a child from a previous marriage, so all of them lived together in Edgar's mansion, just off St. Charles Avenue in the upscale Audubon Place. I don't know if you've ever heard of Audubon Place, and it was like that back then too. But we're talking, you can't even get in there now. I even looked at it on Google Streets. They wouldn't let the Google car in. It's so gated. Over the years, the Dumonts were among the elite of New Orleans. They regularly appeared on the society pages, and Edgar eventually became president of Standard Export Lumber. He was also a president of the exclusive Boston Club, as well as the Lake Shore Club and the Louisiana Society of the Sons of the American Revolution. In 1933, at the age of 64, Edgar served as Rex. His queen, as is the custom, was considerably younger, a 20-year-old debutante named Mary Frances Buck. The theme of the parade was to be the conquest of the air, but as luck would have it, New Orleanians did not get to see those floats until the next year. Because of rain, the 1933 Rex parade was canceled. apparently the first and so far only rainout for that group. Let's see, Zulu paraded that day, as did Comus, but Rex and the Druids did not venture out. The Rex decision was made by the group's powerful captain. Captain is kind of a position our groups don't have, but the captain in New Orleans runs the show. Quote, if I send them out in this wet and cold and these men develop 5 or 6 pneumonia cases, I should never forgive myself, the captain told the Times-Picayune. One human life, or even the life of one mule, is worth more than a parade. Instead, Edgar and his queen were taken to the Boston Club on Canal Street, where Rex was presented with the key to the city by 14-year-old Helen Saunier. Am I pronouncing that right? Saunier? It's S-O-N-N-I-E-R? Saunier. From the New Orleans Female Orphan Asylum. Wearing a pink silk dress with silver lace and a silver crown cut out of cloth, Helen had been chosen for the honor by the mayor. The Times-Picayune presented the pitiable picture of the little orphan girl left at the reviewing stands at Gallier Hall, waiting for the parade that never came. When asked if she was disappointed, little Helen said, well, yes, ma'am, but I was thinking too, how many others are disappointed because they won't get to see the parade. Shortly after, Helen was told the ceremony would take place in the Boston Club before the entire court and many guests. There were pictures in the newspaper of that as well. The Rex Ball was held at the Athenaeum. Edgar and Mary presided as gracious rulers of an adoring court, the Times-Picayune reported. They probably say that about every year. As is tradition, Edgar and Mary and members of their court journeyed at midnight to the municipal auditorium to greet the king and court of Comus. The year after Edgar's reign, Ethel Dumont, remember Ethel, was named queen of the Mystic Club. A non-parading organization that debuted in 1923, the Mystic Club counted many of the top families of New Orleans society among its members. Edgar, for example, was not the only ex-Rex among them. I like saying ex-Rex. The queen of the Mystic Club had to be the wife of a member, but was not the wife of that year's king. And because it was a wife, she was usually much older than most of the queens you saw for like Rex and some of the other groups who used debutantes as their queens. The themes of the Mystic Club balls are very royal, depicting historical events from various monarchies. The theme of the ball on February 10, 1934, Ethel's year, was Gustavus III of Sweden visits Louis XIV. That must have been a rollicking ball. Ethel died in New Orleans in 1958 and was buried in Magnolia Cemetery in Mobile. According to descendants, Edgar left the big house in Audubon Place after Ethel's death, gave away most of their belongings and moved into an apartment. He died less than 3 years after Ethel and was buried next to her. That's the main story. I want to read you this quick little sidebar, if that's okay. We're still good? Okay. The photograph of Ethel Hodgson that was printed in the book Queens of Mobile, Mardi Gras 1893 to 1986, the same photo that's been hanging in the Mobile Carnival Museum, is not a picture of Ethel as Mobile's first empress, or even a picture of her in Mobile. Ethel was 17 when she was coronated by Emperor Felix in 1892. The photograph, however, clearly shows a woman in middle age. Wayne Phillips, curator of Carnival collections for the Louisiana State Museum, solved the riddle. Quote, that's a photograph of Ethel Dumont as the queen of the Mystic Club in New Orleans in 1934, Phillips said. I have no doubt. One of Ethel's few direct descendants, Patricia Ezel, has a crown and scepter on display in the Ezel House, a for-rent event home on Conti Street, owned by Patricia and her husband. It's really just right around the corner. Quote, they were in my bedroom throughout my childhood, said Patricia, who was a maid in the 1970 Mobile Carnival Association court. I was told when I was a little girl that the crown and scepter were used in Mobile. Unfortunately, that's not the case.